I cried driving my husband to the airport. He said he was leaving for 2 years in London. The moment I got home, I transferred $720,000 to my account and filed for divorce. The loading will spun for 4 seconds. I counted them for slow rotations of a tiny gray circle on a laptop screen, and then the number changed. Remaining balance 0.0. I exhaled, set down my coffee, picked up my phone, and called my attorney. Outside, the October sky over Newark was doing that thing it does in autumn, that low bruised gold light that makes everything look like the last frame of something beautiful before it ends. I remember noticing it through the kitchen window and thinking, that's appropriate. Paul had been wheels up for 47 minutes. He had no idea he'd already lost, but I need to back up, because if I start here with the empty account and the attorney on speed dial and the glass of wine I'd already poured, you're going to think I'm the kind of woman who does things like this naturally, coldly, without cost. Music. I'm not. I was for 6 years exactly the kind of woman Paul Reynolds needed me to be. Loyal to a fault, quietly confident, emotionally available, financially generous, and his favorite quality, though he'd never name it out loud, trusting. Music, not naive. I want to be precise about that distinction. I was not stupid. I held a senior project management role at a biotech firm in Hoboken. I managed a team of 11 people and a quarterly budget north of $4 million. I had a graduate degree from Penn and a reputation for catching discrepancies that other people missed. I just didn't apply those skills at home. I think a lot of women do that. Compartmentalize. Keep the analytical mind for the office. Bring only the soft version of yourself home. It feels like a gift to your relationship, like saying, I trust you enough to turn off my armor here. It's actually an invitation. Paul and I met at a conference in Philadelphia. He was in commercial real estate development, charming in that particular way that men in his industry tend to be, confident, without being aggressive, well-dressed, without being vain, funny in ways that felt effortless. He laughed at my music jokes before I'd finished delivering them. He remembered details. He asked follow-up questions. We dated for 14 months and then got married in a small ceremony in Vermont. 32 guests. My parents flew in from Portland and my mother cried the right amount. My father, a man who expressed approval through silence and firm handshakes, shook Paul's hand for a long time. Feeling lucky, my parents died 8 months later, a car accident on I-84 just west of Hartford during a snowstorm in February. A truck, black, music ice, the kind of thing that happens every winter on that stretch of highway, and somehow you never imagine it will be your parents. The grief, music was, I don't have words for that kind of grief. Even now, the sudden total reorientation of the universe, waking up every morning with 3 seconds of forgetting before it crashes back in. Paul was kind during that time. Music, he was present. He held me when I couldn't stop shaking, and he sat with me through the paperwork, through the state attorney visits, through the long, awful process of converting a life into a series of numbered assets and accounts. My parents had been careful people. My father had worked in finance for 31 years and believed in 3 things: compound interest, whole life insurance, and maintaining liquidity. By the time everything was settled and the music taxes paid and the estate closed, I had inherited approximately $740,000. I was 34 music years old, newly orphaned, and sitting on more money than I'd ever had in my life. What do you want to do with it? Paul asked. I said, I wanted to invest it conservatively, keep it in low-risk funds, let it grow slowly over time. I wanted to honor the discipline my parents had modeled. Paul said that made sense. He also said that we'd been renting for years and the market was good, and maybe this was the moment to finally put down roots. Music. Somewhere, he had a way of framing suggestions that made them feel like your own idea by the time you agreed. We bought a house in Montclair. Nice neighborhood, good bones, a kitchen I actually love. We put $420,000 toward the purchase, half mortgage. Music, half from the inheritance. The remaining $320,000 went into a joint investment account that Paul helped set music up alongside what had grown to around $400,000 from earlier savings we'd combined. So that joint account, by the time we reached the part of the story that matters, held approximately $720,000. My parents' money, my savings, music, my inheritance. His name was on the account. That was the thing. That was the specific, technical, legally significant detail that Paul had apparently been counting on for some time before I figured out. The first music strange thing happened in August. I'd been looking for a car, insurance documents, the physical copies. We kept in a drawer in the home office, and I opened the wrong drawer by mistake. In it, I found a folder I didn't recognize, manila, unlabeled, thick enough to be significant. I opened it. Inside were printouts, marketing materials, glossy photos of a high-rise in Miami, Brick Hill Skyline Residences, the kind of building that exists to tell people how much money you have without you having to say a word. Floor-to-ceiling glass, infinity pool on the 42nd floor, a lobby that looked more like a hotel in Dubai than an apartment building. I held the pages for a moment and told myself it was nothing. Paul worked in commercial real estate. He looked at properties all the time. Maybe this was research, maybe a client, maybe something from a conference. I put the folder back, closed the drawer, but my hands felt slightly wrong for the rest of the evening. A low hum of something I didn't want to name. 3 weeks later, I came home early on a Thursday. My afternoon meetings had been canceled, and Paul's laptop was open on the kitchen counter. He was upstairs on a call. The screen was unlocked. I don't know what made me look, some combination of that humming feeling from August, the way he'd been sleeping slightly differently, a barely perceptible shift in the temperature of our household that I'd been cataloging without consciously meaning to. I sat down at the counter. The laptop was open to email. The name at the top of the most recent thread was one I didn't recognize, Claire Dawson. Music. I should tell you that I sat there for a full minute before I clicked on it. I wasn't afraid to look. I was afraid to confirm something I didn't want to be true. There's a difference. Denial is not stupidity. Denial is a rational attempt to preserve a life you've invested in. I clicked. There are specific moments in your life where time seems to restructure itself, where you feel almost physically the before and the after crystallizing on either side of a single instant. Music reading. Paul's email to Claire Dawson was one of those moments. It was a long thread, months of messages, most of them mundane or affectionate in ways that made my vision blur slightly at the edges, but it was one specific music email sent 3 weeks earlier that did the structural damage. The London project will go through September. Once I'm there, the distance helps. She'll start to adjust to the calls getting shorter, and by the time I get back or decide not to, the situation will be manageable. I'll finally be free soon. Distance makes everything easier once she stops interfering. She stops interfering. I read it twice, then a third time. She interfering. The woman he'd been sleeping next to for 6 years. The woman whose inheritance had purchased the house he was currently standing in upstairs on a work call. The woman who had cried in his arms after her parents' funeral. Interfering. I scrolled the lease, assigned, dated. Rental agreement for Unit 4207 at Brick Hill, Music Skyline Residences in Miami. 2 names, Paul T. Reynolds, Claire A. Dawson. Start date, November 1st, 6 weeks away. I scrolled further. The ultrasound, a black and white scan. Image attached to an email from Claire. The kind you forward when you want someone to see something in real time, and you can't help yourself. Her message. Beneath it, she's perfect. I think she has your nose already. She, a daughter. I set the laptop down very carefully. The care with which I did it was probably dissociation, the body managing the mind's imminent by giving it something simple and precise to do. I went upstairs. I passed the door to the room where Paul was pacing on his phone, gesturing the way he does when he's being persuasive, that easy fluency of a man who has never questioned his own ability to convince people of things. I went into the bathroom, ran cold water, pressed my wrists under the tap. Music, and I thought very clearly with a steadiness that surprised me. I have a choice about how this goes. I did not confront him that night, or the music next day, or the day after. I went to work. I ran my meetings. I ate lunch, checked my email, reviewed a contracts proposal, texted Paul that I was running late, picked up Thai food on the way home, and we ate it on the couch, watching something on Netflix that I couldn't have described to you an hour later. He laughed at a scene I didn't follow. He put his arm around me. I leaned into it. I was professionally music excellent at managing multivariable projects under pressure. I just hadn't realized that skill music was transferable to my marriage. On day 2, I called my financial advisor. Her name is Sandra Okafor. She's been managing my personal account since before I was married. A meticulous, unsentimental woman who had, in music fact, suggested I keep a private individual trust separate from any joint accounts. When Paul and I merged our finances, just a best practice, music she'd said at the time, not suspicion, just hygiene. I done it, filed the paperwork, funded it with a nominal sum, largely forgotten about it. I called Sandra from my parked car in the Hoboken parking garage and told her in clinical terms what I had found. She was quiet for 3 seconds. The joint account, she said, is it accessible to you independently? Yes. Music, how much? Advance notice, do you need to initiate a transfer? Same day. Another pause. Then you have options. Music? She said, tell me what you want to do. On day 3, I called an attorney. His name is Marcus Gallagher, referred to me by my company's legal team, a family law specialist with 22 years of practice in New Jersey and a reputation for being efficient in ways that opposing counsel tended to find unpleasant. I met him at his Morristown office on a Wednesday afternoon. I had a folder. In that folder, I had screenshots of the email thread, all of it, the lease, the ultrasound, the message calling me in, interference. I had a screenshot of the Brickell Skyline lease with both names and the start music date. I had a handwritten timeline. Marcus reviewed the documents without expression, a quality I came to deeply appreciate in him. You have a strong position, he said, particularly given the inheritance documentation. We can establish clearly that the primary source of funds in the joint account is traceable to your estate. Is that relevant to the divorce settlement? Extremely. In New Jersey, inherited assets are generally considered separate property, even if they were deposited into a joint account. We can argue music, constructive trust, and intent of the original owner. The fact that he commingled the funds doesn't automatically entitle him to half. He paused, but timing matters. If he transfers or dissipates those funds before we file, he won't, I said. Marcus looked at me. He doesn't know I know, I said. He's leaving for a supposed London work trip in 4 music days. He's planning to land in Miami. Understanding moved across Marcus's face, slow, and then all at once. When does his flight leave? He asked. Saturday morning, Newark, 8:15. Then we have a window, he said. File. Friday, execute the transfer, serve at the Miami address. He lands into it. I nodded. Music, Ms. Reynolds, he said. Carefully, are you sure about this? I'm sure about the math, I said. The emotion, I'll process later. Saturday morning, I woke at 5 o'clock. I made coffee. I watched Paul pack. Efficient. Music. Practiced the bag of a man who'd done this dozens of times for real work trips. He was convincing even in his packing. The man was thorough. We drove to Newark in near silence, the comfortable kind you build over years of mornings together. He had his hand on the gear shift, and I watched it and thought about every decision I'd made that had led to this car, this man, this particular Saturday. And I thought about my father's hands and the firm handshake he'd given Paul on our wedding day, and I let myself feel that for exactly as long as the drive allowed. At the terminal, he held me. He pressed his mouth to my hair. He said things. London, music, sacrifice, future, home. You're my home, Natalie, he said, his voice doing the thing where it thickened at the edges. The performance of genuine grief so polished I would have believed it 2 weeks ago. I pressed my face into his chest so he couldn't music see what my face was doing. I cried real tears, not for him, or maybe a little for him, mostly for the version of him I believed existed, for the man I thought I'd married, for the years of it. I waved until he disappeared into the security line. Then music stopped just like that. The tears turned off like a faucet. My shoulders dropped, my jaw unclenched. I walked to music, my car. At 10:14 a.m. from my home office, I opened the joint account. Balance, $720,000. I initiated the transfer to my private trust. Music, the account Sandra had helped me set up. The account registered solely in my name. The account Paul had never known existed. Sandra had been on standby since Friday. The bank had already been contacted. The transfer had been pre-authorized. The loading wheel spun 1 rotation. Music, 2, 3, 4. Transfer complete. Remaining balance, 0.00. I exhaled. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher, I said, he's gone. File. Immediately. Serve the papers too. Brickhouse Skyline Residences, not London. Miami. Understood, Ms. Reynolds. Consider it done. I opened the wine-eyed. Bought 2 days ago specifically for this. Moment a bottle of Sancerre, because my mother had loved Sancerre, and it seemed music right, and I sat in my kitchen, while the October light moved slowly. Across the floor, I waited. It took exactly 2 hours and 11 minutes. Music. His name lit up my phone at 12:26 p.m. I answered warmly, hello, my love. Did you land safely? What came back was not. Paul Reynolds, the charming commercial real estate developer, the man who laughed easily and remembered details and pressed his music lips to my forehead with manufactured tenderness. What came back was something stripped of all of that, a voice I hadn't heard before, raw, cracked the vowels, misshapen with panic. Natalie, music. A gasp, something is wrong. My card, it got declined. The account, it's empty. Natalie, everything is gone. What happened? I took a slow, music sip of wine. Oh, that, I said softly. I moved the funds today. A sound I don't have a word for, somewhere between a choke and an exhalation. You what? And then the panic crested into something uglier, the veneer cracking all the way through, Paul's voice going jagged and uncontrolled in a way I'd never heard in 6 years. That was our money, Natalie. Our future, our security. You don't have the right. Technically, I said pleasantly, I have every right. That was my inheritance, my parents' music money, my investments. So I made the logical decision to keep it somewhere safe. Silence. Then the slippery register, the pivot he made when bluster wasn't working, the tone he'd used in 100 small negotiations throughout our marriage, lower, more intimate, designed to make you feel like you were being brought into a confidence. Natalie, you don't understand what you're doing. There are responsibilities now. Obligations. You can't just. Responsibilities. I said, you mean. Claire? He stopped breathing. The silence lasted long enough that I could hear background noise on his end. The specific ambient sound of an airport. Arrivals Muzak. Somewhere in that building, divorce papers were being signed for and waiting for him at a residential address he'd never told me about. I know about the penthouse. Paul, I said, I know about the lease. I know about the ultrasound sitting in your email thread right next to the message where you called me in. Interference. Natalie, the divorce papers are already filed. I said, they'll be waiting at Brickell when you arrive. Welcome home. A pause, then, please. The word came out collapsed. Structureless, humiliating, completely unrecognizable from the man who'd kissed my forehead at departures 3 hours ago. I need those funds. I can't do this without there's a child, Natalie. There are expenses. I'm asking you. I thought about my father. I thought about his careful, patient discipline. 31 years of building something so that his daughter would have a foundation. I thought about the February highway, the ice, the music truck. You're a gifted storyteller, Paul. I said pleasantly, I'm sure you'll figure something out. I ended the call, removed the SIM card, snapped it in half. The 2 pieces sat in my palm, and I looked at them for a moment, and then I set them on the counter and picked up my wine. The divorce process took 8 music months. I'm not going to pretend it was clean or painless, because the lie of the redemption narrative, the version where the betrayed party reclaims their power, music in a single decisive moment and rides into a clean horizon, is one of the things I find most irritating about the way these stories get told. The truth is messier. The truth is that even when you've protected yourself, even when the money is safe and the papers are filed and the trap is sprung, you still have to wake up every morning for several hundred mornings and do the ongoing interior work of processing the fact that someone you loved and trusted and built a life with was at some fundamental level a person who looked at you and thought manageable. Obstacle. Music, that's the thing that doesn't resolve in a dramatic airport phone call. But let me tell you what did resolve, because it is satisfying and because you've earned it. Marcus Gallagher filed the divorce petition on October 14th. The grounds included adultery and financial fraud. Specifically, the allegation that Paul had been structuring our joint music finances with intent to dissipate marital assets during the discovery phase. This wasn't just a marital claim. It was the basis for a civil music action. Sandra Okafor provided a detailed financial forensics report. She'd been tracking what turned out to be a pattern of small, irregular transfers out of our joint investment account over the preceding 14 months, amounts small enough that they didn't trigger automatic flags, 17 transfers, ranging from $2,000 to $14,000 total, approximately $89,000. Where had it? Gun, a secondary account. Music, not. Claire's his, a business account, registered to a Shell LLC that Marcus's team identified within 3 weeks of filing. He was staging an exit, Marcus told me with the professional evenness of a man who'd seen this before, building a separate capital base so that by the time he left, he had independent liquidity you didn't know about. How long had he been planning this? I asked. Given the earliest transfer date, he checked his notes, at least 18 months. I'd been married to this man for 6 years. Music, he'd been engineering his departure for a year and a half of him. The second year of our marriage, I'd held his hand at his grandmother's funeral. I'd driven him home because he was too shaken to drive. Music himself. I'd made soup from scratch because it seemed like the thing to do. I thought about that on the drive home from Marcus's office. Music, I let myself think about it completely without protecting myself from it. And then I put it down and didn't pick it up. Again, Paul retained a family law attorney in Florida, a man named Gregory Feltz, whom Music Marcus described with a brisk economy of opposing counsel, familiarity as aggressive. Music, but sloppy. Paul's initial legal position was that the joint account funds were marital property and that my transfer had been an unlawful dissipation of assets. He wanted them returned. He wanted them split 50-50ths. He wanted, essentially, to be compensated for the failure of a plan he'd spent 18 months Music constructing while sleeping next to me. Marcus responded with Sandra's forensics report, the complete inheritance documentation, tracing every dollar to my parents' estate and a detailed accounting of the $89,000 in prior transfers from the joint account to Paul's private LLC. Feltz apparently went quiet for a week after Music receiving that packet. When he resurfaced, Paul's position had changed substantially. There was a deposition in February. I sat across a conference table from Paul Reynolds for the first time since the airport. He looked, I won't say diminished because that would be too satisfying a word, and I'm trying to be precise. He looked revised, like a document that had been edited down. The easy confidence was present, but differently. Music calibrated, the way a dial can be turned to the same apparent position, but feel different under your hand. He didn't look at me during the deposition. His attorney asked me questions for 4 hours. Marcus had prepared me for 3 sessions over the preceding 2 weeks, and I answered every question with the same effect I'd used on that October phone call: calm, specific, factual, pleasant. At one point, Feltz asked me whether I had intended the transfer to harm Paul's financial position. I intended, I said, to protect assets that were primarily constituted of my inherited property following discovery of my husband's plan to abandon the marriage and relocate to a residence he had leased without my knowledge. My intent was self-protective. Feltz looked at me for a moment. No further questions on that line, he said. The settlement was finalized in June. I won't give you every number, but the framework. I retained the primary funds from my inheritance. Paul received a portion of marital assets accumulated during the marriage, income earned jointly during our 6 years, which was fair and which I did not contest. The $89,000 from his private transfers. Music was factored into the settlement as an offset. He did not receive half the inheritance. He did not receive the house. We sold it and divided the equity, which was the right outcome, even if leaving it hurt in ways I hadn't anticipated. He received in total significantly less than he had planned to walk away with when he stood in that airport and pressed his lips to my forehead and called me his home. The Brickell penthouse, as it turned out, had been signed with a personal guarantee that Paul could no longer service once the joint account was empty. Claire Dawson, to her credit or her self-preservation instinct, Music was not on the hook for that guarantee. The lease went into default. I'm told they moved to a rental in Broward County, though I don't know the specifics and I don't particularly want to. Their daughter was born in December. Her name, I heard through a mutual connection, is Sophie. I thought about that. I thought about the ultrasound I'd seen in Paul's Music email. She's perfect. I think she has your nose. And I felt something complicated and human that I couldn't reduce to a single emotion. Claire Dawson didn't know me. Loyalty. Sophie Reynolds didn't know me. Anything at all. I sent Marcus a bottle of whiskey and Sandra a gift certificate to a restaurant she'd mentioned once in passing. These felt like the right acknowledgements. In March, Music 5. Months after the airport, I called my therapist. Her name is Dr. Vivian Marsh. She's been practicing for 28 years, specializes in trauma and attachment, and has the quality I most value in people I pay to be honest with me. She does not tell me what I want to hear. You've been processing this, she said. In our first session at Music A, distance, the strategic mode was adaptive. Now there's nothing left to strategize, and the feelings have to go somewhere. Music, I know, I said. Are you angry? I thought about it genuinely, which I hadn't done in A while. Not really, I said. I might think I'm sad, which music feels insufficient, but also accurate. Sad. About what specifically? About the 6 years, I said, about the fact that I'll never know which parts of it were real, whether the tenderness was ever real or whether it was always performance, or whether, and this is the one that stays with me, whether he genuinely didn't know the difference himself. Dr. Music, Marsh looked at me. That's the question, isn't it? She said, not whether he lied to you, but whether he lied to himself at the same time. Yes. Music, I said, and I'll never get an answer to it, which means I have to make peace with not knowing. That, she said, is the actual work. I want to tell you something that doesn't usually make it into this kind of story. The money helped. I'm not going to pretend it. Hint. Financial security in the aftermath of betrayal is not a small thing. The ability to stay in a hotel while I figured out housing, to retain music, good legal representation, to take a week off work without catastrophizing about what it would cost me. That mattered. That was practical and real. But my parents' money was never the point. The money was the mechanism. The point, the thing that still occupies me on certain nights when I'm being honest with myself, was the years, the specific, unrepeatable years of a life that I had organized around a center that turned out to be hollow. I was 37 by the time the divorce was finalized. Music, my parents were gone. The house was sold. The marriage was over, and I was, to use the language Paul had apparently used about me, no longer interfering. I have thought about that word so many times, interfering, what it says about the model of reality. He was operating inside a model where my existence in music, his life, my presence, my love, my investment of money and time and emotional labor was experienced as interference with something he was trying to accomplish. Music. I was the obstacle to him. I was the wife. Here is what I want to tell you. If you are reading this and you are in the middle of something that feels like it might be this, trust the hum. I don't mean act on it instantly or assume the worst without music evidence. I mean, when your body is telling you something is wrong, when your hands feel slightly wrong and you can't name why, don't perform the work of dismissing that signal. Music, don't rationalize it away out of loyalty or fear or love. Sit with it. Investigate quietly. Document carefully. Talk to Sandra Okafor before you need to. I was not stupid. I was trusting, and I applied that trust selectively, the way most of us do, generously toward the people we love, cautiously toward everyone else. The reorientation after everything was not about becoming less trusting. It was about distributing trust more accurately toward people who had actually demonstrated they deserved it, toward myself specifically, toward my own perceptions and the data my nervous system had been collecting for months before I chose to process it. My father used to say, the numbers don't lie if you're willing to read them. He was talking about finance. He was also, it turns out, talking about everything else. 6 months after the settlement, I went to Portland. I hadn't been back since the estate was settled. It felt too large, too complicated, too full of the specific weight of the life my parents had lived there. I'd been avoiding it in the way you avoid the really important things when you have so many smaller urgent things to manage. I stayed in their house for a week. I sorted through the things that needed sorting. I sat in my father's chair and read the books on a shelf. I found a photograph of my parents at my wedding, the two of them standing just outside the frame of the official photos. My mother mid-laugh, my father watching her, with an expression I recognized as love, rendered so habitual it had become indistinguishable from breathing. I kept that photograph. I drove out to the stretch of I-84 where it happened. I Don't know exactly why. It felt necessary. The highway looks like every other highway, gray and indifferent and continuous. I stopped music at a rest, stopped nearby and got bad coffee and stood outside in the February cold and said some things out loud that I'd been saving. Then I got back in the car and drove home. Paul Reynolds is still in South Florida, as far as I know. He's working, presumably building things or selling them or convincing people to invest in them. The daughter he has with Claire Dawson is almost a year old now. I genuinely hope she's well. I hope she's given parents who show up for her. I hope the version of Paul that her mother fell in love with is the version that turns out to be real, that he's better at this than he was music at. The last thing that whatever he's capable of tenderness toward gets actually received. I am done is what I'm saying. Done carrying the weight of what he did in any direction that interferes with my own life. Interferes. I smiled. When I wrote that word, he walked into Newark Airport that Saturday morning, believing he was leaving a fool behind. He landed at Miami International to find divorce papers waiting at a Miami address he'd never told me about, a joint account with a zero balance, and a phone call from his wife that made it clear she'd known everything for 3 days and simply waited. He thought love made me blind. It didn't. Music, it just gave me a reason to be careful. The fool he left behind had already gone home, transferred the funds, opened the wine, and started the rest of her life. And she had, for the record, already won.